Donald Trump has won the presidential election again, and after a 4-year break, will be taking office again in the new year. As of the filming of this video, I'm filming this in November of 2024. So there's a lot of commentary out there on that, but what I was thinking is, how is this going to affect reading / is this? Like, what happened last time? Were book sales impacted by this? And I am particularly interested in like genre fiction. So what I primarily read is fantasy and sci-fi, if you're not familiar with my content already. So I want to do a little bit of research on what happened last time during his election, more broadly with books and then within genre fiction. And are there any things that maybe I can predict or we can predict about what's going to be popular versus not in the next coming 4 years? So first off, research about this is actually really hard. Googling certain search terms like books, Donald Trump, like I was searching a lot of things that was like books that were popular during Trump's first presidency, books that were popular 2016 to 2020, books that were popular like following Trump getting elected, whatever. And if you put books and Trump in anything, it's immediately going to pop up like all of the books about Trump's last presidency or like books that Trump has come out with, because apparently he's written like 6 books. Okay. And then just like things and commentary about his presidency. And that's not what I want to focus on. I do not care about any of those books. But just very broadly, until we get into some of the genre fiction stuff that I'm most concerned about, because that's just what I'm drawn to. It seems like surprising probably no one that during his first election and then following this election, there were sales in certain books that spiked a lot. According to New York Times bestseller lists and Barnes & Noble bestseller lists, as well as a recent interview that was done with the Barnes & Noble director of books, there was a massive bump in dystopian fiction, again, during his last presidency, as well as right after this election. Most notably, The Handmaid's Tale in 1984. I don't think any of that is super surprising. The Handmaid's Tale and 1984 in particular are 2 books that throughout his last presidency, as well as whenever people are talking about him, are like, this is what, you know, his policies and things are trying to make happen. You know, there were so many things at the Women's March that happened, I don't even remember what year now, that were like, make The Handmaid's Tale fiction again. Like, that has been a relevant book since it came out, so it was 1984, and then it just keeps getting more relevant within politics and things as time goes on. I will come back to the dystopian thing later when we talk about specifically genre fiction. The Barnes & Noble director of books specifically said fiction and nonfiction books that feature fascism, feminism, dystopian worlds, and both right and left-leaning politics rocketed up our sales charts with the election results. So then, that's 2024. Now, when you actually look at the, like, again, looking at his last presidency in order to predict what might be happening book-wise during this presidency, it's hard. I mean, I'm not sitting here and making a spreadsheet. I probably could and do like whole data analytics. I'm not going to do that. I'm not spending all of my time on this. If you would like to do that and make a whole video essay on it, go for it. But looking over a bunch of Amazon bestseller lists, Amazon Kindle bestseller lists, New York Times a little bit, because New York Times is not really a good marker for bestsellers, because we've talked about this before. It's just, it's skewed. Book scan lists, I looked at a USA Today list, a little bit of the Goodreads lists and things. Like, I kind of tried to amalgamate just generally, broadly, what was popular as far as during that presidency. And there aren't a lot of things that super stand out for genre fiction, which again I'll get to, but obviously, like, kind of what that quote that I just talked about said from these current election results, you're seeing all of the really popular classic dystopian fiction really having a bump. So It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis, 1984 by George Orwell, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury are the ones. So these are probably for a number of reasons. One, they're being read in schools and things. We're really like comfortable with these because a lot of people read them during school. So even people who aren't big readers are probably going out and reading some of these things. They've been classics for a while. It's not like these are things that were never read before and all of a sudden we're getting picked up. Like, one of the charts that I saw from like 2016 to 2017, there was like 2,000 more sales of 1984, which again is like a decent jump, but is not like, you know, oh, they were not being read at all. Like, I think it was still like 4,000 copies were being sold a year, and then all of a sudden 6,000 copies were sold in 2017 or whatever. So yeah, these like classic dystopian political commentary books have always been popular, but were more popular after the 2016 election and during his presidency and right now. Then obviously there have been so many books that have come out actually about Trump's presidency, time in office, you know, like people sort of, I guess it wasn't completely undercover, but like people that worked in his, you know, campaign and things, tell all stories were very popular throughout the years and then since his presidency. Books by Michelle Obama and Hillary Clinton came out as well, and those were popular, but these are, again, also books that they're big names. They're books that people who aren't necessarily frequent readers still pick up, like the few books that someone will read that year, right? But outside of some of those main like political commentary type books, I wasn't necessarily seeing this big trend in any kind of like genre fiction that was like a reaction to Trump's presidency at all. Some of the big names in best-selling just still remained big names. Books by John Grisham and Frederick Bachman, Paula Hawkins, Jojo Moyes, Nicholas Sparks, like these are names that pop up every year that they have a book out. So like, again, doesn't seem like any of these books were particularly following anything political and having something to say and being like the big book of the moment. They're just kind of bestsellers that will always be bestsellers. Now moving on to genre fiction, so specifically fantasy and sci-fi books, I again was looking at, are there any trends in what people are reading? And the way I did this, and again, wasn't completely conclusive, I was not doing deep data analysis, but I was looking at a bunch of what was on the bestseller list for certain genres, which is really hard to do. I was mostly reading like lists and things that were compiled about like what places were recommending, like Barnes & Noble and some of the different like speculative magazines and stuff, but we don't really have like a chart that's like, here's all of the best-selling fantasy. You can sometimes do it on Amazon, but not completely and always. So then I was looking at like award winners, but again, award winners are not necessarily bestsellers or just what people are saying are like some of the best things that came out the year that they came out. And also realizing that with all of these numbers, that books are usually on like sort of a, especially traditional publishing, like a 2-year cycle of like, oh, they probably wrote that like 2 years ago. So you maybe aren't even seeing things that are in commentary of like the Trump stuff until maybe 2017, 2018, 2019 anyway. But even with all of that considered, it's not like the genre fiction winners of things changed a lot. Like, it's not like they weren't a commentary on politics, but my theory is that genre fiction in general tends to always be a commentary on politics, so things aren't really shifting in any noticeable way when stuff like this happens. So for example, books in the 5th Season trilogy by N.K. Jemisin were winning awards in like 2017, 2018, things like that. This was an already ongoing series by the time Trump got elected. This was already like a post-apocalyptic, very dark world with a female main character and like speaks about oppression and stuff. But again, like that's just sort of the general vibe of a lot of fantasy books, especially like adult fantasy. It's not like that was a particular commentary on this one presidency. It's just kind of like, hey, this is a commentary on state of the world in general, kind of regardless of who's president. The first book in the Every Heart a Doorway series by Shauna Maguire came out in 2017, I believe, or came out in 2016 and then was nominated for things in 2017, whatever. This could maybe again be a little bit of like commentary because it's a portal fantasy kind of series. It's kids that got kicked out of their like perfect worlds that were fantasy worlds and they're trying to get back and all of that. And so you could make a like, again, a string of commentary around, oh, is this saying something about how it feels like we jumped timelines and like now we're in the bad place, we're in the bad timeline. Like that's what so many people were saying around 2016 and since, honestly. So is it like something having to do with that? Maybe, maybe not. There's nothing in the author's note commenting on that. Maybe Shannon said something somewhere, but I think it's just portal fantasies are fun. And that series does comment on a lot of like trauma things, but yeah, I don't think, again, specifically about the presidency. I even went back and looked at a number of like popular booktubers at the time, best books of, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020, even though like that's when his presidency ended, just to kind of get a spread of things. Mostly people that read sci-fi and fantasy, and again, didn't see anything super pronounced around that. So it was, a lot of the same heavy hitters that we see now. Sarah J. Maas, Cassandra Clare, Brandon Sanderson, Mark Lawrence, like all of these same authors that we just see were also present there. So it wasn't like there was any like big series coming out again in response to the political climate. I think honestly that, like I said earlier, genre fiction just tends to be about some of these political things in general. Like you always have like the very known trope of, like almost all classic fantasy books are about this, that there's some like dark force that you have to topple. That's present in any fantasy book, generally speaking, any like epic fantasy. Someone having to like take up the mantle and overthrow tyranny, and there's a corrupt empire, like all of that exists every single year in fantasy and sci-fi books. Even that comment I read earlier about fiction and nonfiction books that feature fascism, feminism, and dystopian worlds, those are things that are kind of popular throughout. The one thing I will say as far as speculative is that I was maybe also expecting to see more books on the bestseller list that were more modern dystopians, like The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games might have popped up, but like Maze Runner and I don't know, like all of those more popular 2010s dystopians. And you don't really see that. It's like none of those were really popular. I think potentially because people are like, this is so far outside actual reality, slash like I don't want to read about this when this is possibly what's happening to a lesser. I mean, I don't know. The classic dystopians go up in popularity. The more modern dystopians seem not to. And I don't think we're going to get a boom in dystopian books. Like some people are saying, oh, we'll get a boom in like YA dystopian and all that dystopian. I don't think so. It didn't really happen in 2016, and I don't think it's going to happen now. So yeah, as far as predicting genre fiction books based on political climate, I don't necessarily think that I can, based on previous data. I think genre fiction just tends to follow some of its own trends and its own tropes and things that are popular and are popular in waves. You know, right now we're doing sort of a cozy fantasy thing. For a while there, we were doing grimdark. Romantasy is really popular. I think that will continue. Like, I don't think anything is going to shift because of politics in this case. I think a lot more of what shifts ends up being like literary fiction and some of these things that are very like heavily thematic and, you know, you're trying to win awards and whatever, and like there's something to that. But again, genre fiction tends to cover these things always, like oppression and tyranny and overthrowing that and like corrupt governments. All of these things are popular like tropes within the genre all the time. My theory is that nothing will really change a ton due to this election in this, because genre fiction is always speaking about politics in this way. If you think I'm wrong, comment below and let me know. Again, I think there's other genres that it may impact, so if you are reading more in those genres and those are things that you've noticed, definitely let me know. I know that in particular horror books tend to be more politically driven. For example, we tend to get the vampire that generation needs is a thing. So maybe if you read a lot of horror media, let me know if there's like responses to different presidents and things that pop up. But yeah, as far as the books that I read, I don't tend to see a lot of this. We'll see though. If there's a rise in dystopian, I won't necessarily be shocked, but I don't see it. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.